Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is a neighborhood garden walk-around video, and we're going to start at a landscape job that Steph and I actually installed over the last couple of years. If you followed along with this like 5-part landscape installation that we did here in Raleigh, we're showing off some of the plants this morning have just absolutely taken off. This is just been, it's kind of amazing how some of the things that we put in this garden is last spring. When the vast majority of them went in. This loquat has absolutely gone wild down in this low spot. And we're filming this in the morning, and I can tell why. The sun is coming up right here. The southeast is right there. And this sun comes around this thing and hits the house and reflects back into this area. And it's 5 to 10 degrees warmer where I'm standing right out of the gate in the morning. Than it would be otherwise. And so this loquat, where we're in a marginal area for them, and we had a couple nights in the teens during the wintertime, completely and totally unharmed by it. We'll eventually limb this up into a little more of a tree so we can underplant it in here, and it'll stick up big and tall above the retaining wall in the back. A couple of other things that look really, really terrific. We've got the Chef's Choice rosemary down here. This looks so good. It doesn't get direct sun until a little later in the day, and it passes by on this side and it's pulling it out. This is, a low growing rosemary, and the sun is just pulling it out this way perfectly. It just looks fantastic underplanting this Indian hawthorn. This is Clean Sweep Snowbank, which is one of the new Indian hawthorns from the Southern Living Plant Collection. It's incredibly clean foliage. Some older varieties of Indian hawthorns got leaf spot really badly, but this one has just been incredibly clean in our garden. And here, for some reason, and I don't know if it's because of the amount of organic material that was put in this bed before we started on this project, all the plants in this garden are growing faster than they are at our house. And we've amended our soil quite a bit over time, but I think when we started this project, there was like 8 inches, 10 inches of mulch. And what we actually did was we didn't initially mulch this at all because we wanted that mulch to break down. But that landscaper who had put all that mulch down for all that time, it had damaged the existing plants that were here. But by us allowing it to break down for some period of time before we jumped into this project, we just kind of let the weeds take it, because something needed to happen to get this mulch. It was overly applied for years to break down, but once it did, it improved the soil so much that the plants are just thriving. This has really been the year for Viburnum tinus. First of all, this is the fastest growing Viburnum tinus I've ever seen. This is another kind of marginal plant here in our area. Not marginal because it dies in the winter, but marginal because typically we'll get late frost on the flowers that will damage them and just kind of set them back. But these have just, again, I got this little heat pocket, and it's identifying these things within your garden, these spaces where you may be able to grow marginal things or things that get damaged late in the season. But these Viburnum tinus, and everywhere in the city, they're just thriving this year, but these have grown more than I've ever seen this quickly. This less, like a year ago, probably we were here planting these as little 3-gallon containers, and now they're 4.5 feet tall, something like that. These white flowers will eventually become like a almost metallic color, black fruit later in the season. One of my favorite evergreen viburnum, but they can be, again, they're not marginal in terms of being killed in the winter, but they are marginal in terms of whether these flowers, because they flower so early, are ever going to open. These microclimates can be super interesting because where that loquat and that Viburnum tinus are really thriving with the additional heat, it's preventing any frost from really settling into this low area, and it's warming up super fast in the morning. So if it's despite the fact that it's below freezing at night, it's coming up above freezing really quickly. Well, you would think that heat island would hurt this rhododendron. We don't have a lot of large leaf evergreen rhododendrons here. They're native to Western North Carolina and all of Appalachia, but here down in our flatter clay-based soils with the heat that we have, they tend to not do as well. There are some here and there that look fantastic, but overall, I would think the vast majority of these rhododendrons that are planted in gardens fail over a fairly quick period of time. So you wonder, why in a heat island of all things would this rhododendron be thriving like this and be so budded up? And I think it's because the roots are shaded on it. That retaining wall right there and the mulch that's under here and the shadow of the house later in the day is actually creating, and its own canopy is actually creating a situation where the top is perfectly capable of taking the sun, and a lot of sun, and it's these roots on them that where these ericaceous plants, these azaleas, rhododendrons, blueberries, PRS, a lot of those types of plants have very shallow fibrous root systems up near the top of the soil. So this thing planted out in the sun on someone's foundation where the sun comes up and immediately strikes the roots and there's no plant that's close to it, they get damaged. Their roots are what's being damaged. But this thing, again, it's a little interesting thing. It's actually a heat island, but its roots are protected. This is one of the tough spaces we were dealing with when we were doing this project. The neighbor has some colonizing forsythia, and they look great when they're in bloom right now, but they were planted a long time ago, and they're root suckering everywhere. It took forever to dig them out from this side. They're gonna continue to try to come over here, so they're gonna have to be chopped out occasionally. The Jane magnolia up at the top is pretty much full flower right now. That thing looks absolutely fantastic. It'll get limbed up a bit as it grows taller in the future. I think it looks pretty good blooming at the same time as the ruby loropetalum next to it. They match up pretty nicely. These ruby loropetalum will get pretty big. This is one of those loropetalum that's tagged, 3 to 4 feet, but we had one at the nursery that was probably 12, 14 feet tall if you let them. These will just get limbed up in the future and try to create some sort of screen across here. But I think they look good blooming at the same time, and it's again amazing how much these ruby loropetalum were this big 12 months ago, and they have really taken off. The side here is another amazing rate of growth. We put this mixed border screen in, so there's a combination of a couple different viburnums, Alyssium, Mahonia, Osmanthus fragrans, Alyssium. I'm not going to name every plant. We did this a series of videos, 5 videos for this. Mixed border screen was one of them, and we like to use a mixed border screen like this because if one of these plants has some sort of issue, then you're not going to lose this entire screen. And I'm also just in general impressed with how fast they've grown. The viburnum, the Shindo viburnum that are up there have more than doubled in height since they've been in the ground. They're growing reasonably full. This is a mixed light space, and so things are going to reach a bit. You can see the Shindo viburnum that's behind me, how we've pruned it a bit to try to get some more growth down here at the bottom, and we're going to win, but I'm going to have to prune it occasionally at the top, or they'll have to prune it occasionally at the top. This other border planting that Steph designed for the side here with the beautiful Cuba and the cast iron plants, these have really thrived on the side. It's absolutely amazing how much this has grown. And again, I think it comes down to the period of time where we let this mulch break down, and it's basically like starting off with wood chips. It just ignites the soil, and then this thing is more than doubled in size. I would not call this typical of a Cuba growth initially. They're not usually in any kind of hurry to grow. But you can see it reaching a bit. Cuba's for shady conditions, but even it has a limit, and this is a pretty shady space. So even these will need to be tip pruned eventually to get them to fill out a little more. One thing about this job is we're fighting invasives. Same thing in our garden at the house. There's English ivy that's come back along this bank here where we thought we had gotten rid of most of it, but it hasn't been kept an eye on for a while. As those things are either seeding themselves in there or coming back from roots, they've got to be chopped down pretty frequently. And again, just this lot is just completely surrounded by invasive plants. The Carex looks fantastic. Japanese maple will leaf out pretty soon. That's Tamukiyama, the one similar to the one I have at the house, except for mine's corkscrewed. The Utopia plum yews look fantastic here. Really love this plant. I think they're super underused. We just formed a little half moon circle around them. The soft caress mahonia up at the top, the cast iron plants, everything's just going wild here. It's really nice to see. There's one of the Stella Ruby magnolias up at the very top up there. This is a good time of year as we're filming this. This is a Japanese ligustrum that has seeded itself in here. This is a good time of year to find these types of things. The soil's still soft and it's easy to get them out. This is going to need to be remulched at some point here, so good time to be taking out some of these invasives, and it becomes mulch here in the garden as well. But this place has really responded extremely well. I like to come back to jobs that we've done in the past and take a look, but this is only, at the most, a couple things are maybe 18 months old, but vast majority of it's only about 12 months old at this point. It was in the spring last year when we did most of this project. So let's bounce around the neighborhood and see a few other things. One of the things that's all over the neighborhood is our native Carolina jessamine, which absolutely peak flower here at the beginning of March. It's probably a hair early. Normally I'll see a few flowers on them at this point, but this is probably a week or two early on just absolute peak bloom. The fragrance of these is just out of this world. You'll walk past it certain times and it's super fragrant. Other times it's not. Holly and Griffin are enjoying the walk while we show off some of the plants in the neighborhood. Of course, this is a native vine, and it's evergreen. Lots of people use these as ornamental plants. There are a couple of other varieties out there. There's one called Pride of Augusta that has a double flower that I used to grow in the nursery. There are some other interesting versions of this. They can get a little out of control over some period of time, so keep that in mind. It's not necessarily it's not the lowest maintenance vine in time. I actually had a landscape job years ago, and I priced it at, like, I was still by myself before I'd hired anyone, at like $400 or something. I charged them and ended up there 2 days to take out 4 of them. They had put one on each corner of their of an overhead seating area that they had, and it took me 2 solid days to cut them off and 4 trips in a full-size pickup to the stump dump. So I learned very early on, if I was pricing anything out with these kind of vines, it's going to be a long, hard day of work to get them out. So keep that in mind. Beautiful, great native plant, but it will, over some period of time, require some maintenance. This is one of our absolute favorite plants in the entire neighborhood. This is Clematis armandii, or the evergreen clematis. You can see it starting to bloom up here, kind of pretty decent sized white flowers, a little smaller than some other clematis named cultivars and species, but really beautiful, great foliage. Even if this thing did not flower, that foliage is enough for me to love this vine. I recommend it all the time to people. It's not to be confused with like sweet autumn clematis, which is really a very invasive plant in our area, which people love and they plant it, but man, does that thing seed itself all over the place. This will not do that. And I love the foliage. The stems have a reddish color to them. And like any other vine, it's going to require some control occasionally, but what a beautiful addition to the front of this house. Directly across the street from that evergreen clematis is a sweet autumn clematis growing up on this crepe myrtle. I don't think it was planted here. They seed themselves all over the place. We always have them coming up in our garden. It's actually an interesting mix of a couple of other things in here too. I see a Japanese ligustrum growing up through the middle of it as well. But this one blooms in the fall. It's super fragrant. I can see the appeal of it. It's got lots of little white flowers on it, and it's fragrant, but it absolutely is it's everywhere. It comes up in our garden just non-stop. There's one planted somewhere nearby, and it just seeds itself. I think the birds must be moving them about or something, because it's just everywhere. Very difficult invasive plant to control. But again, I can see the appeal of it. It's beautiful white flowers, fragrant flowers, blooms at a time when not a lot, most of the other flowering things in your garden would have bloomed out, but this is sweet autumn clematis. This is something we actually look forward to every year. This is Iphion, growing in one of our neighbors' lawns. If you're going to grow one of these bulbs in your lawn, you got to hold off mowing for a little while. So they'll let their turf will end up growing quite a bit over time, because you really don't want to cut this foliage off, before some of it dies back. There are other plants we can use for this, Glory of the Snow and several others that can be added into a lawn like this and naturalized into a lawn. It's quite beautiful. They have a very small section of a fescue lawn out here in their front garden, and it comes to life like this for a few weeks every spring. And again, we always look forward to it. Everything is a little earlier this year. So this is probably a little earlier than we're normally seeing this in full bloom, but isn't it a beautiful thing? Just naturalized bulbs in a lawn. What looks like a beautiful field of yellow flowers is actually an invasive the common name for it is lesser celandine. Unfortunately, it looks a lot like our native marsh marigold. And so I think people may not know what this actually is. It takes over an area really quickly though. It's a spring ephemeral. So it's been up and growing here during the late winter months. And then it comes into flower right at the beginning of March and seeds itself like crazy. These flowers produce tons of seed, and it tends to grow in kind of moist areas like this. But I think that we found it over in our garden, even growing in slightly drier conditions. We're pretty close by this little field of them here. This really needs to be eradicated. Riley actually asked that people report places where this is growing. You can see how out of control it can get in a very short period of time. But this is one we're battling in our own garden because this has just been allowed to just kind of take over. But unfortunately, it's taking a lot of space from other things that would like these kind of marshy, wet conditions. You can see how it's completely covering up the ability for any seed to germinate this time of year from any native that might want to occupy this moist shade, part shade condition. One other thing I'd point out on them is that flowers close during the night and they'll open up during the day. And again, it's quite beautiful when all of these flowers are completely open with that bright yellow against that dark green foliage. It's quite beautiful, but man, is it invasive. Look how thick it is right here. Nothing else is going to grow in a space where these things take over. A couple of things here at the house before we wrap this up. This candy tuft is an example of not giving up on something. This sat here and struggled for 2 seasons out in this really kind of tough condition out by the road on this corner. It had a big butterfly bush that was competing with it, and other things going on with it here. But given a couple seasons in the ground, it got its roots under it, and now it looks fantastic, and it's coming into full bloom, and it's exactly what we wanted it here. Some sort of low evergreen ground cover that would creep out toward the edge of the road over time. So again, sometimes it takes a minute for something to break through and get itself established enough to really look like what you had in mind when you planted it. Here's a spot of that lesser celandine growing in our garden, slightly moist area next to a rock. But other areas we're finding it's not as wet as I would have expected it to be. But this thing is just being spread around everywhere. Really difficult to dig this one out. If you don't get all of the roots on it, it'll just come right back up in the same spot for sure. And then right beside it, we have a Brunera, which has started to flower with great foliage, beautiful blue flowers. But I got to get this weed out of here before this thing will absolutely take over this entire space, as we saw around the corner. We have a difficult time here in the south with hybrid tulips. Having them come back year to year. We just don't get enough cold treatment. We don't get enough chill hours on them to have them come back vigorous. They don't sleep long enough, and because they don't sleep long enough, they don't store, they don't come out as vigorous. They come out very, very strange variations that we get of them the second year, third year when they come back. Sometimes we'll get enough cold 1 or 2 years to keep them around, but most of the time they fade over time. But we do have like 5 different species tulips out here in the garden, maybe more than that. And the Baker's lilac is the first one out of the gate this year. Again, this is early morning, so just like that lesser celandine up the street, the flowers are closed up. Once the sun is just getting on them this morning, they'll open up big and wide, and they have this yellow in the center of the flower that's really super striking. I love these, a lot of these species tulips. They're just such great interest plants. And again, it's another one it's one we can use here in the South and still have that feeling that we have tulips. Of course, they're not like this, but they are quite striking. Again, we have about five different species, and they all come back very reliably. Some of them have colonized a bit as well and taken a little bit of space over time. You'll notice the different timings on your bulbs in your garden. We probably have 5 4 to 6 plantings of these Baker's lilacs around the garden. This is the first one by far that's blooming. The others are still closed up. Foliage is up and everything, but they're still closed up. This one gets a little more sun on it in the early morning, and it sped it up just a bit. So there are some things in and around the neighborhood and a landscape job we had done last year that are showing off here in Raleigh, or annoyingly invasive here in Raleigh. Anything in your garden that's looking good right now, let us know down below. Thanks for watching.